Hey, Calvary family. I am so glad that you're joining us today for this podcast. My name is Pastor John Nelson. I'm the pastor of spiritual formation and discipleship here at Calvary. To my right here is Pastor Josue, who is our lead pastor. And to my left is our bishop, or our pastor emeritus, Pastor Dan. And we are glad that you're joining us. And I want to start with why we're doing this podcast, because this is something we've never done before. This podcast is designed to help us really think through and walk through Scripture as a church family. We want to wrestle with questions that have naturally come up as we've kind of gone and preached through this series. And as we're digging through Genesis, we are starting at the beginning with this podcast, just Genesis chapter 1 and moving all the way to chapter 6 where we are currently in the series. Reason we're doing that is we want you to understand more and more about who God is and what he wants to do with us. And as we go through these foundational passages, Genesis 1 through 6, we learn about God, humanity, sin, and the world we live in today. And really, we're asking those formational questions that you and I need to know to move in our faith. We're not claiming to answer every question. We're not claiming to have the ultimate answer for everything exhaustively, but we want to give you a framework to work through it biblically. So our goal here is not just information, it's formation. That's our goal. Our first conversation, like I said earlier, will be through Genesis 1 through 6, and then we'll have another conversation at the end of the series that'll lead us from Genesis 6 all the way to 11 that'll cover the whole Genesis series we're in currently. But whether you've read these passages 1,000 times, or maybe this is the first time you've ever read Genesis, we're asking you to grab something, sit down, and let's get into these passages together. Now, I want to start off with the first question that was submitted to us, and really, it goes to Pastor Josue, and that is this. Pastor Josue, was it 6 24-hour days as you were preaching through the scriptures? You kind of mentioned it might have been 6 24-hour days, or is it more like 6-day ages, like 1,000 years of creation? How do you understand it?
I don't know if I can help. Definitely, I'll share a couple of thoughts. Of course, when we're reading the Bible, we are trying to understand it in the best way that we can, because we understand that has the purpose to transform our lives so we can become more like Jesus and accomplish the purpose that God has for us. So when we are reading, we want to understand it well. And Genesis, well, as you have been saying, it's interesting because it has a lot of things on it, not necessarily all the answers that we are looking for. And that's one of the things that in my own study, I have kind of come up with a lot of questions. And what about this? What about that? And the text is not necessarily answering, because that wasn't the original purpose. The account that we have, I think that he said at the beginning of this series, this is theological history. So we believe that what is in there is true. And that's number one. That's so important. This is not kind of an idea or an example or a story that it's trying to illustrate what happened. We believe that what is there is true, number one. Now, the interpretation, because we know that there are different kinds of literature, right? So is this history as we understand history nowadays? That's why the theological adjective, theological history, is so important, because the main purpose is to, from my perspective, what I understand is to help us understand who God is, who we are, what is our purpose in life, and how all these things working on, and where are we coming from, where are we going, where is our mission here, our relationship with God, all those things. So coming back to your question, because that was kind of a rabbit trail. 24 hours days or longer periods of time. Well, the most natural reading of the text would indicate 24 hours days. Now, is that the only one possible if you are a believer? I would say no. I would say there are other possibilities, right? Because we see that how do we count time and how God counts time? It's not necessarily the same. Now, there are a few things when we are reading literally with the 24 hours concept in mind. We need to keep in mind that the sun was created in the fourth day. So before that, we see the evening and the morning, the evening and the morning. Right. how did that happen without the rotation of the earth around the sun? Miracle. That's the only answer that we have.
Yeah.
How can you have evening and morning if you don't have the star, the sun?
Right.
Well, we don't know. Is that reference? Is it giving us an idea that there's more literature figure here talking about the day and not as a 24 hours or more long time? Yes, there are different opinions here. Something else important here is that we see kind of a pattern. The first 3 days, it's God is forming. The days 4 to 6, God is filling. Mm-hmm. So again, we see some kind of a structure there to help us in the original readers to understand, memorize, transfer to the next generations about, number one, that God is creator, that there is purpose with everything that he did, and there's order here. So I don't think that I'm answering your question. Again, the more natural reading would be 24 hours. Okay. I don't think it's the only one if you're a believer. You can still believe the Bible is God's word with no error, and believe that those days were longer periods of time.
So if a Christian believes like in a day age or a million years, that would be okay?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Again, the Bible is, there are connotations, there are implications. Yeah. And as we interpret other verses in the Bible, what are those implications? How the pieces connect with each other? I think there are godly people, honestly, even smarter than me, for sure. Not than you, not at the end, but smarter than me that are on both sides, thinking that those could be longer periods of time or the 24 hours days.
Right. Pastor Dan, I know you kind of hold to a position. I'd love to hear you expound on it a little bit for us.
Listen, this part of the Bible is fascinating to me, just simply because it's the introduction. And if you spend time on the introduction, as we are here today, that's a big deal because it affects everything else along the way. Well, so I'm just kind of a simple, ordinary, plain, straightforward kind of guy. So when it says day 1, day 2, day 3, evening and morning, I'm going to say, okay, how did Moses, when he first wrote these words down, if he read them to his kids, how did they understand that? Because I think that's very important. So I think you're right. The normal, natural way of interpreting this would be to say these are 6 regular days. And the dynamic of and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, of the age of the earth enters into this a little bit as well, plus the idea of how does the rest of the Bible interpret these first few verses of Genesis? Yeah. And there's probably only one place, Jesus refers to it, Peter refers to it, but there's only one place where the numbers, and in the Old Testament, a number is never used with the word day to refer to a long period of time. And by the way, bottom line is, I would agree there are Christians who are going to be with us in heaven singing praises and working and playing golf or whatever happens in heaven.
Amen.
Who have a different view of this.
Right.
But I want to study it enough to be able to come to some conclusions on my own. Yeah. And how the Bible interprets this is important, especially when you come to Exodus chapter 20 and the 10 Commandments. Just as God in 6 days created the world and then rested the seventh, is a pattern for us, and that pattern seems to be restricted to the week. My own personal journey, though, my biggest concern is this. My own personal journey is that I wanted science and the Bible to fit together. And as a student who first heard about evolution, I thought, where do all these evolutionary years and so on fit? Do they fit into Genesis chapter 1 somewhere? And yeah, there was a clue. There's a space between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and I grabbed onto that theory. And all of this, by the way, is scientific theory because it has to do with origins. It cannot be reproduced. But I grabbed onto that and I thought, now I know where all these prehistoric events and so on fit.
I see.
And I shoved it in there until I got to college. And I was mentored by a guy who has a PhD in science, chemistry. He was the head of the College of Engineering. And he took me under his wing and said, Dan, let's not make science be the ultimate and try to fit the Bible into science. But let's do this. Let's make the Bible ultimate and try to fit science into the Bible. And I love science. I love science. And to actually drop science a little bit and put the Bible at a higher level was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
And yet that's kind of the perspective that I have. And there's a lot more you can say about the 24-hour day stuff, but those are kind of big issues.
Pastor, I think you bring up a great point when we're digging into this. And I just have a question. Where does this all fit? Like, where does evolution fit into all this? I have kids that are in school currently, and evolution's in the books, and they're learning about it. But when I read Scripture, I'm not really seeing it there. Or when Pastor's preaching, I'm not hearing it there. So how does that work? Given your engineering background, how do you make all that work? One of the questions that came in was this. And maybe that'll help frame it for us. Is it godless or guided? Did evolution just happen, or is God made it happen? Is he guiding it all the way through?
That's a question for several volumes somewhere along the way. But for me, and I want to understand, this is something that I hold to very deeply. And people around me know that because I also find that, and there are different kinds of evolution. I understand that. There are just different descriptions, but typically it's built upon science which cannot be proven, just as the miraculous is built on something that we may see, but we don't understand it.
Explain that a little bit for me. Science that cannot be proven, because a lot of people would say what we read in our books, our textbooks is proven. So help me understand that.
Yeah, it's really there. Well, you don't see transitional forms today. You see variations within species, but you don't see whales coming back out of the water and turning into cows, or the other way around, whatever it might be. And also, the description in Genesis 1 just seems to fly right into the face of evolution. Because evolution says, I need a lot of time and a lot of chance. I need to be lucky. And I say, let me take luck and let's throw it into God's lap and say, God designed this thing. So you have dynamics there where things like, you've got fruit trees before insects in Genesis 1, which flies right into the face of the evolutionary timetable. You have the sun. You mentioned the sun earlier.
Right.
You have the sun on day 4. That's a whole lot closer to the beginning than if it didn't happen for billions and billions of years in the evolutionary scale. Yeah. So the dynamic is this. Evolution is an attempt to explain life without the miraculous. And so it's kind of a choice. Now, I know we want to combine the two. We want to make that work.
Yeah.
But it really is kind of a choice. And the dynamic is such that I have to say, okay, can I explain this? Origins, wherever you come from, origins cannot be explained. I don't care if it's evolution. I don't care if it's creation. I don't care if it's the miraculous. You can't explain it. It's not reproducible in the lab. And that's kind of how I approach the whole evolutionary question on a big scale.
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, faith is required everywhere.
Yeah.
So because people holding on to the evolution theory, they can explain the origin. So there's the theory about the Big Bang and the explosion, and you have to come up saying, okay, where was the origin of this? And who put those things together? Well, those things were there.
Right.
Since when? Since the beginning. So And where was at the beginning? When was the beginning? What were the elements at the beginning? And there's no explanation for that.
Right.
It's like, well, we believe that's how it was. And then we come to the biblical account saying there's purpose, there is meaning, there is a creator. And I think what humans are looking for, it's found there. We can find our purpose. We can find the direction in life. We can find some of the answers. I wouldn't say all of the answers, but the main answers for the main questions make much more sense in the biblical account. And I'm just thinking about, again, using reason now. I'm not saying this is what I believe. Yes, of course, this is what I believe, but makes much more sense than just saying, well, I'm the fruit of coincidence that honestly nobody has seen ever being replicated, as you said. It's impossible. I always say the same thing. You take a puzzle of 1,000 pieces, shake it, throw it, it's not done. Shake it, throw it, it's not done. How many times you do it, doesn't matter. It will never be done. 1,000 pieces.
Right.
Try with creation, try with humans. And then you keep going on and on, thinking like, and our soul, and our spirit, and our rationality, and everything that makes us humans different from animals. Evolution cannot explain it. And I remember studying this in psychology, saying, one of my professors saying, well, that's all the fruit of your brain. So there are a lot of things that the brain cannot explain.
Right.
and you feel it.
Yeah.
You cannot explain it, but you feel it. Well, this is fruit of your brain. No, it's not. So, yeah, it's a complex, as Pastor Dan was saying, this could take us weeks and years being here. But, yeah.
So can you be a Christian and believe in evolution?
You know, as a Christian, I have a lot of inconsistencies. I would consider that an inconsistency. But I would ask more questions. Why do you believe in evolution? I don't believe categorically that is the essence of the gospel. That isn't what makes you a believer. But I'd want to know why. Is it because of your position on God or on his sovereignty or his power? Or do you look at science as the ultimate savior? That finally, if we can make science work, we're going to solve all of the world's ills.
Well, what if it was more of, that's what I learned in school.
Yeah.
I've learned it. That came out of the textbook. My science teacher told me all this stuff. That's what I understand. And I come to church, and now I'm hearing a origin story that's fundamentally different than what I was taught in school. And so I'm trying to connect the two because I believe, the history and everything else. And now the church is saying, hey, that's not true. Yeah. So now what else is not true?
About the Bible or about life.
About life. So, so I'm trying to figure out how this works. That's why I'm, a lot of people are asking that question.
I think part of the purpose of the church is to help us look at life critically and to establish a good worldview. And so when we help people realize that not everything I hear from my friends or my teachers or even my parents may be accurate, but I need to look into the scriptures. And that's the purpose of this podcast, is to get people to dive into the Bible and find out, what does it say? So my first exposure to anything that was contrary to what my parents or my church taught was in 8th grade biology class.
Wow.
Where the teacher put a picture on the wall that showed the development from a dog to a horse. And none of those animals between the dog and the horse exist today. But that was evolution.
Yeah.
Now, believe it or not, the teacher didn't believe it. But he was supposed to teach that.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the things we need to learn as Christians is that we need to look at life and recognize that the way we look at life is to a great extent determined by what we understand about Genesis. Genesis 1 through 11. That's why we're taking a lot of time in that particular series.
But somehow this question is also connected to the first question. The old earth, the young earth, and yes, we have believers. Actually, we have scholars. We have strong believers.
Yeah.
Both sides. Now, the implications, again, about the evolution, did that create the different kinds of animals at once or through time, it's a different question. Sorry, than evolution. I think again, we will need some definitions about evolution or adaptation or changes, qualitative changes that makes you or makes this kind of animal to be something different, not that animal anymore, or there are adaptations, changes that we see. So
And I think that's what I was going to ask next, and I'm so glad that you said it, is I think all of us here would agree that adaptations happen within species.
yeah,
You know, like you saw in The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin's book, the bigger beak, the smaller beak. You know, you see, I mean, my golden doodle somehow descends from wolves. I'm still trying to figure that out, right? So there's adaptations where it's still the same species.
Yeah.
But there isn't speciation where brand new species are being made.
Yeah.
You're not seeing different kinds. And one of the things that stuck from 7th grade science is the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I don't know why I still remember that, but it's there. But over and over, I'm realizing there aren't new species being created. There aren't new, under all of these, you're seeing adaptations, changes, and that allow for things. I was reading online the other day about how grizzly bears have now come into contact with polar bears because a lot of the ice caps are melting.
Yep.
And now they have pizzlies, which is a thing of nightmares to think about. Pizzlies, polar bear, grizzlies. I'm like, that is stuff of nightmares because polar bears are, well, that's a whole thing. We can talk later. But again, that's an adaptation. That is not necessarily a new thing. That is just a freak of nature of a very huge, or even like a ligon, or
It's a genetic crossbreeding.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, or even where we get donkeys. So adaptations happen, but we don't see speciation. Is that fair to say? Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to say something. I don't think that you can be a believer and believe in the general concept of evolution as it is known in the world, because it loses one of the most important things in the Bible, is our relationship with our Creator, our purpose, again, in life, and again, why we were created. So in evolution says, well, there wasn't any purpose. You're a coincidence. You are the result of a chance. So that's a big, big, big issue, I think, non-negotiable with our faith.
All right, so let's stick with creation. Now, you were preaching, you were talking through Adam and Eve and the creation of male and female, but that's not the reality for all people that we have here. We have those individuals that don't exactly fit those categories, and we've had people ask about normative versus normal and how that all fits. And as we're experiencing the result of really a fallen world, I would love for you to help explain how intersexed people fit within the narrative of the Bible and really the narrative of the world we live today and what we're hearing preached from our pulpit. Could you help us understand that?
Again, all my answers, all my opinions are coming from a very humble position, because what I read in the Bible, I really believe it, but at the same time, the implications, I don't have all the answers. And but I think we need to start, as we read the text, that everything that God created was good. And we are talking about the creation in that time period before the fall, in a way, and after the fall, in a different way. I think we had a conversation. We humans were in that state of where there wasn't any sin, there wasn't any pain, there wasn't any death. It's a completely different world. No sickness, no issues. It was pretty much enjoying God's presence and His gifts for humans. Now, something happened, and that was the fall. It was our sin, and that changed everything. All pain and sickness and our consequences came because of that. And again, I'm very cautious and I remember saying this in one of my messages, this was God's original design, binary sex, men and women. And yes, that's what I believe. That's what I see in the text. It's clear. Now, what is the response with people that have certain characteristics, like an extra chromosome, or it's affecting their physiognomy, right? What is our response? Well,
And by the way, you're talking about genetic issues here. We're not talking about this is my preference or this is where I want it. This is my desire. We're talking about a genetic difference in terms of that normative look.
exactly. Yeah, genetics, physical development, healthy conditions. That's what we're talking, not preferences. Now this is, well, I don't feel that I am, so I'm choosing to be. No, I'm talking about people that are struggling physically with their condition. Well, I want to reaffirm something that I said very clearly in one of my messages, is that every person bears God's image.
Yes. Yeah.
Every single person, no matter what, we are created in God's image. And that could bring us to the topic. So why my body is not representing God's purposes? Well, we just talk about the fall. Yeah. It's not this is not the only situation. We have many more with people that are born with different conditions, physical conditions, not necessarily affecting their sexuality, but affecting other parts of their bodies. So starting there with the dignity and the worth and the identity, they didn't change. They have not changed. But yes, our bodies are complex, and sometimes they are reflecting the issues of the consequences of sin. Not our sin personally, but yes, our sin as humans, generally speaking.
I want to kind of press on a hot seat a little bit here. So yes, we're all created in God's image. We all bear the image of God. So does that mean God is making mistakes by creating people that are intersexed? Is that what we're trying to say here?
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. But definitely we experience the consequences of sin nowadays. So, for example, let's say that someone is born without one of the fingers. Was that the original design as God planned as Adam and Eve? Right. No, that the original design was the 10 fingers, right? What about this kid, this baby that was born with 9? Well, that's one of the effects of the fall. And that's not what we want, that's not what we like. It wasn't God's purpose originally, but that's, again, the consequence. And again, I'm using that as an example that applied, in my opinion, to other areas, including the intersex cases.
Thanks for saying that. I want to clarify that because I think that's something that people really need to hear. And you know, we live in a sin-sick and broken world, and you know, people can hear, and unfortunately, people do hear, like, I'm a mistake. I've had people tell me that before, like, I'm a mistake. I shouldn't be here, and that's just not the truth. God loves you. He wants the best for you, and just know that we are in a broken world. And so, as we kind of keep moving, I did want to ask the question about another phrase you used in that same sermon. It was a great sermon, but same sermon, you used a phrase about reproductive technology. Could you help kind of explain what that means and what you meant by using that?
Seems that it was all on me, right? I was creating all the issues that people are facing. Yes. Remember that message also, that I was reaffirming the sanctity of life. Yeah. And it was Abel and Cain and their story, right? And again, I think I see in the Bible there's a very clear principle. Life is not something that is in our hand for the good or for the bad. Life is not something that we control. Life, it's holy because it's given by God. It's a gift. And that's the main principle. Now, the implications, I would say that most of the people, or for sure all the believers, will say, yeah, I agree with that principle. Yeah. Now, the implications are more difficult, right? When we're talking about euthanasia, when we're talking about abortion, and I refer to the reproductive technologies. Right. And I remember having a conversation with one person in our church, and he came to say, what do you mean when you mention this? Any kind of reproductive technologies are against God's purposes? Well, again, we go back to the original design. God provided the reproductive technologies, right? In a physical way.
Yes.
And that was the original purpose. And we are suffering the effects of sin also in our reproductive capacities. With some people having issues to have babies.
Yeah. That was our story. That was our story.
Yeah.
We struggled for 5 years to be able to have a child, and it was probably some of the hardest times because people in our world could get pregnant on a whim. And we'd have people come up and ask, oh, when are you guys getting pregnant? We couldn't. So, yeah, I understand that very well.
Yeah. So they are trying to figure out, to find ways to become parents. Mm-hmm. And that's another discussion, obviously. Is that our right to be parents? Is that a gift to be parents? How should we deal with even the commandment to fill the world that feels that we have done pretty well because we are several billion of people already, right? Now, what I wanted to mention, and probably I should have gone deeper in that statement, is that we need to be very, very, very careful as believers. How do we treat life? How do we deal with life? Again, I believe that life starts the conception when an egg and sperm get together, and that's where life starts. If you do that in a bottle, this is still life. How cautious are we treating with that life?
The snowflake babies? Yeah, snowflake babies. Yeah.
I don't know the term, probably not even in Spanish. So, but that was my heart behind. Yeah. I'm not telling couples, hey, you're sinning when you are using reproductive technologies. My pastoral heart was, let's be very careful in front of God because life is holy. It's something that it's given by God. And we cannot, and I again, not judging anyone, but we need to be careful, not playing, not saying, well, these are just a couple of cells together in a bottle. No, they are not. At the moment that the egg is fertilized, life starts. Even if it doesn't look like a baby yet, but it's the beginning of life. And that was the heart behind. So again, I want to tell people again, we're open to one-on-one conversations because most of the times it's very difficult from the pulpit. Yeah. I don't know the specific situation of this family. I don't know the specific situation of this person. Sometimes I have heard cases. This person was conceived in that way. It doesn't mean that God didn't intend them to be alive. Not at all. Of course, God wanted them to be alive. And there's purpose in their life, and there's meaning. They were created in God's image. So that's what I wanted to affirm.
So off of that, Pastor, I want to ask you, and I mean, you're the elder statesman here. You're grandfather and father, you've done it, So we don't need the birds and the bees necessarily. I think we'll let the parents take care of that. But what's the purpose of reproduction?
Well, it's actually pretty simple because God said, look, your purpose here is to fill the earth. Yeah. And one of the issues that comes up with regard to birth control or with regard to reproductive processes and so on is that we have tended to look at a normative human process as a problem. Yeah. And that is just simply not the case. By the way, that's one reason why I would argue for a young earth. If the earth were really as old as some people would suggest, and we've been around for billions and billions of years, this place would be a graveyard of people. But it's not. It's very habitable, and in fact, just provides a lot of space for us. I think, however, as we turn the corner, genetic engineering, which is becoming extremely popular for embryos, and to say, hey, listen, we want to change whatever needs to happen there. Boy, you got to take a look at the ethics of that. I don't know that I have the ability to look at that, but I don't think we can categorically say, yeah, this is okay because God's letting us use our brains to sort of fix things ahead of time when we're not even sure what a normal human being is. we just don't know. And the older I get, the less sure I am of what a normal human being is.
I think that in the mornings when I get up, if I'm normal or not. I actually think a lot of things looking in the mirror. But I think that, when we look at the biblical implications of reproduction, of technologies that we use, like it is a blessing to be in a time where we do have medicines, where we can, I was reading an account with my daughter the other day of Harriet Tubman getting brain surgery at 76. And instead of anesthesia, she bit on a bullet. And I'm like, that's insane. Can I please put me out? Right? Like, if you're going to saw my head open, put me out. I don't want bite a bullet.
Yeah.
Like, kick rocks for that. Right? So I praise God that I'm in a time where I can go to sleep, have a good nap, wake up, and be better. Right? But at the same time, we have to be very cognizant of the technologies that are being used, because sometimes for genetic engineering, or we may do something where we have conceived eggs that are now frozen and we're not sure what to do. And then we have these snowflake babies. Mm-hmm. We have all these different things that we got to start thinking the ethical implications behind them as Christ followers. Mm-hmm. We have biblical implications that we have to stand behind that the world may not need to, but we do. And what does that look like for us to interact? And what does that look like if we really believe that life begins at conception? What does that mean for us as believers moving forward? And so I think, these are conversations we have to continue to have, and we have to continue to dig into as a church and even as a country and as Christ followers. But I think we need to be serious about the implications that can come out of them if we treat this too flippantly.
Yeah.